Among the chaotic swirl of Manson family members, she was just another face in the crowd. A name once whispered and then forgotten. Someone whose name you might not even recognize. Someone hidden in the margins of infamy. She went by many names. Kathy Myers, Catherine Barton, Patricia Ann Burke, Patty Sue Jardin. But if you know anything about the Manson family, you know that that's Catherine Irene Gilles, nicknamed Capistrano, and that wasn't by Manson, that was by George Spawn. George Spawn gave a lot of people nicknames that are accredited to Charles Manson, and Capistrano is one of them. Family didn't really call her Capistrano though. They called her Cappy, and Manson even called her Silver, and she even called herself Silver Wings and Silver Hawk and Silver from time to time. Actually, if you've watched any of the videos in the past that I've done where I've read some of the things that Cappy's written, be it poetry or writings, I even showed you some that they did in the Rolling Stone, she signs her name there, Charles Manson. And that's quite appropriate because there's a lot of stories in this Manson family thing have been attributed to Charles Manson or even blamed on him that may have started with Capistrano. You see, they say in this story, there's two different stories to how the Beach Boys met the Manson family. One of them was there was girls hitchhiking and they got picked up by Dennis Wilson. Another story was Tex Watson met Dennis Wilson. But you know what? Capistrano knew the Beach Boys well before she ever knew the Manson family. So, wouldn't she have been a better connection, already knowing them? But really, we should start from the beginning of the story, you know? From the beginning of Capistrano's life. Because she also might hold the mystery of Charles Manson was supposed to be a monkey. No, that was Capistrano too. She was also a groupie of them because they were all groupies of each other. They had these pretty little girls hanging around at the swimming pools at these houses of like the Monkees and the Buffalo Springfield. And she was just a groupie in that. She followed it all and she knew them all. She knew them all well before she knew the Manson family. So there was no mystery there when it came to Capistrano walking into the Beach Boys' house. She already knew them. So they've been telling us some stories all along. That's why things don't add up, and I just don't believe anything anymore. So let's get into the beginnings of the life of Capistrano and see what we find out here. Catherine Irene Gilles came into the world on August the 2nd, 1949, in the idyllic coastal city of Santa Cruz, California. She was born into a family that seemed on the surface destined for greatness. Her parents were the kind of people whose accomplishment filled the local papers, their names woven into the fabric of the community. Her father, Robert Bob William Gilles, was a celebrated coach, a war veteran, and a pillar of Santa Cruz surfing community. Her mother, Patricia Myers Gilles, was a pioneering biologist whose groundbreaking work earned her accolades and a place prestigious in publications all over the world. They were the kind of parents who seemed to have it all. From the outside looking in, Kathy Gilles, as they called her, these are her grandparents, Mr. and Mrs. William Whitfield Gilles. The mom and dad of Capistrano's father. The parents of her mother on the Myers side, they had a retreat out in Death Valley, just a summer place. So this family sounded pretty happy actually on both sides. These people were married for 50 years. That's why they got put into the newspaper in the first place. 50 years, can you imagine being married for 50 years? Some people can't even live for 50 years, let alone be married for it. She looks happy, he looks dead. just as I would expect for some guy to be, you know, looking after 50 years of marriage. But that's her grandparents, and this is her family. It's a pretty happy family. Like I said, on the outside, those are the faces that I mean, these people weren't actually putting on faces. They've been married for 50 years, so they've been able to struggle it out, but these are the faces of Capistrano's family. The Gilles family's first physical home was as storied as their legacy. The Gilles farm, located at the end of Ocean Street Extension, was a symbol of Santa Cruz history, now the resting grounds of Santa Cruz Memorial Park Cemetery. But Kathy felt no sense of rootness there. It was a place of expectations, not comfort. Yep, Cappy's grandparents lived in a cemetery. He was a caretaker. It was a farm that actually turned into a cemetery later. But the Santa Cruz Cemetery, Memorial Park Cemetery, was the Gilles family's farm. Just a fact. So, from one to another, they both are pretty historic spots in Capistrano's life. We got the Myers Ranch out in Death Valley, and now we got the whole Santa Cruz Cemetery. What else can we learn about Capistrano that we didn't? So this is Cappy, or Kathy as they called her, back when she was in school in Santa Cruz. And we'll learn from a letter that she'll send to Charles Manson later in her life, when he was in prison actually. And we have that letter here today, so we're going to look at it to learn more about Kathy's life. Because it seemed like she had everything going on. But it pretty much ended right here. She was 10 years old, then she was 14 years old, and then she was gone. Kathy's father, a local surfing legend, a founding member of the Santa Cruz Surfing Club, but his love for the waves didn't translate into the bond with his daughter. She inherited his love of surfing, becoming a tomboyish athlete in her high school years, yet even in the water, she was alone. Her mother, meanwhile, set standards so high they were impossible to reach. Patricia's accomplishments, her degrees, her published papers, her recognition as a notable American woman cast long shadows over both of her daughters. Patricia's work in mosquito control and public health was groundbreaking, but her home life was crumbling. By November 1967, the Gilles marriage had disintegrated, and the family, it had splintered. Kathy had already disappeared from their lives, by then seeking refuge in a world far darker than anyone could have ever imagined. So the next time that you hear somebody say, "Charlie don't surf," you can say, "No, but Cappy does." And it would be true, because Cappy did know how to surf. Actually, her dad was a legend. They sprinkled some of his ashes when he died at the pier in Santa Cruz, and he even had a plaque put there. You know, hey, he was a surfing legend, you know. Bob Gilles, coach, who cared about everybody else's kid, it seemed, except maybe his own. So that was Cappy's beginning life. Her parents were well accomplished. She has a sister, and when she took off, that was the end of all of them. They kind of shunned her. You won't ever see anywhere where Cappy's sister ever talks to her again. Even when the mom died, she didn't recognize that she had a daughter, Cappy, and the sister don't even recognize that she had a sister anymore. So it's kind of sad. When Cappy took off, she really took off. She was gone. She was gone. But she didn't go with Charles Manson first. First she went to San Francisco, like all the kids did. She was 14 years old, and she was headed off to San Francisco. She had a flower in her hair, and she was ready. By the time Cappy was 10 years old, she had already began to unravel. In a letter to Charles Manson many, many years later, she would confide the depths of her despair, recalling a childhood consumed by a profound hatred for her mother and an overwhelming desire to escape. "I just wanted it all to end," she wrote, a chilling admission from a child not yet old enough to understand the weight of her own words. So in these letters that Capistrano would send over the years to Charles Manson, and she would be, she was one of the followers that was with him for the longest. TJ and then Capistrano. She was right there. She even visited when she couldn't visit. Because you heard about them times and them other videos that those white prison gangs, they talk about how Manson's girls, how they tricked Manson's girls into doing things. They didn't trick anybody into doing anything. She was doing things on her own, and yeah, she was friends with a whole lot of unsavory people. And it wasn't because of Manson's making, it was because that's the world that girl was living in now. And she had a respect and a love for Charlie all her life, but it wasn't like these guys were tricking Manson's girls into doing anything like carrying knives in their vajayjay. Yeah, that's the kind of things that she was doing in prison while she could still see Manson. So she was taking risks and taking opportunities so she could still be in the vicinity of Charles Manson in a visiting room where they didn't even realize that they just let another Manson family member in, because she was now boyfriend and girlfriend with some other guy in the facility. That's how sneaky she was. With the other girls, they just complained, they won't let us see Manson. She got past all that, and she did things that I don't know how many women would do in their lives, but she did. And in these letters to Manson, she also mentions how much she could not stand her mother. She literally hated her mother so badly, she never ever talked to her again. After 14, that was it. Never ever again. She never even talked to her sister again. And Cappy's kids, they even made comments on the mom, the grandmother, Cappy's mother's thing. Cappy's kids made comments on their grandmothers, like, "Oh, my mom said how great of a person you were." Or, I don't even think they said, "My mom said how great of a person you were." They were just like, "We've heard how great of a," but they never even met her. So she cut it off. And she also mentions in this letter to Charles Manson that her mom knew a lot of things about botanical stuff. So she was telling Cappy all the mushrooms that were poisonous to stay away from. And Cappy mentions in the letter, after her mom told her that those are all the mushrooms that she gravitated towards and ate them. Because she hated her mom that much. She just didn't want to be around anymore, and at 14 years old, she took off. So a lot of these people that they tell you, Manson, they had tragic lives of their own, and her life wasn't so tragic. She just hated it for whatever reason. Maybe something was changing that she didn't like, but she had it pretty good, as you can see. But it was in 1964 when Catherine Gilles ran away from home. She was just 14 years old then. She fled to San Francisco. She was drawn to the vibrant counterculture of the beatniks. There, amid the poetry readings and the smoky coffee houses, Catherine's path crossed with the burgeoning world of rock and roll. It was in this city of free spirits and dreamers that she was introduced to the Canadian-American rock band Buffalo Springfield. Captivated by the music and the lifestyle, Catherine became a groupie, traveling with the band from show to show, immersing herself in their world. Well, for what it's worth, no pun intended, yeah, maybe there was, Cappy hooked up with these people in 1964 in San Francisco, and then she traveled with them all the way up until 1968. It was almost like she was part And a lot of girls back then, young girls back then, and they started now as groupies when they were 14 years old in following these dudes. 14. And it would be 4 more years, so she would be 18 by the time she met Manson. But they always made it sound like Manson grabbed these young girls. No, these young girls got grabbed well before. And they moved to the canyons later on. And then there's stories about Buffalo Springfield and the monkeys. I think it's Peter Tork and all the girls that used to hang out by the pool there. All the little groupies that they used to take care of, you know. Probably 14, 15, 16, you know, that kind of, you know. She was one of those. Capistrano was one of those girls that you read about in them books that they never mention her by name because they never mention any of the Manson people by name. They don't want no associations to these people at all. But I tell you what, they were intertwined with them before they ever hooked up with Manson. As a matter of fact, the first person that Capistrano met from the Manson family was Susan Atkins. And they became friends, lifetime friends after that, forever. Capistrano even wrote to Susan Atkins in jail. She was friends with both Charles Manson and Susan Atkins. They're very good friends. So when they tell those 2 stories of how the Manson family met the Beach Boys, and one of them was, it was Tex Watson who first met Dennis Wilson and introduced them to the Beach Boys. And the second one was 2 girls were hitchhiking and they got picked up, and that's how they met the Beach Boys. But she was a groupie with these dudes here who lived in the same canyon, who all were friends with each other. And some of the same people that showed up at that pool were the Beach Boys. So she would have known the Beach Boys maybe even 3 or 4 years before the Manson family was accredited to knowing the Beach Boys. But nobody ever says that. But she actually knew the Beach Boys well before any person in the Manson family ever met the Beach Boys. Just interesting to me on how they leave things out, and they kind of lead us in different. Why? Okay, Tex met him. Okay, 2 girls met him. What's the difference? Capistrano actually probably met him first. No, I think that's where that legend of Charles Manson was going to be a monkey. I think that comes from her too, because she was hanging out at their house. So it could be, you know, passed down the line. Yeah, you know, a Manson family member hung out at Peter Tork's house. And then it turns into Manson. He once signed up to be a monkey. That's how that stuff works anyway. But she did have a connection to the monkeys. So could have been where it came from. Because there's a lot of things that got screwed up. In Helter Skelter it also says Manson sent her off to kill her grandmother, the Myers grandmother, so that she could gain the property. It wasn't like that. Manson did not do that. He did not send this girl off to kill her grandmother. That's a big lie. She did go off to kill her grandmother, though, because from the letters we can see, and we haven't gotten to those letters, and we're going to read those letters the next time, but we're just, you know, I'm trying to figure Cappy out here, and I keep saying I'm going to do a video, and I never do, but I've got information. I just need to go through it and look at it, and that's what we're doing today. So if you've got anything that you might want to add about Cappy, put it in the comments, because next time we're going to read the letters. We're going to look at, you know, things that just don't add, like the killing of the grandmother. Cappy volunteered. You know why she volunteered? Because she originally lied to Charlie Manson and told him, yeah, my grandmother said we could stay there. She didn't say that. She didn't have contact with her mom since she was 14 years old, let alone her grandmother. And she hated her mom. You think she liked her grandmother? She probably wanted to go gladly off her, you know, because she had a lot of hatred. And again, we'll look at the letter and you can make up your own mind. But she didn't like her mother, I'll tell you that. You wouldn't leave home at 14 if you loved your parents. So we'll look into a lot of things. We'll look into the fact that she was there when Zero offed himself. She was, anything that you can think of about Cappy, put it in the comments, because we'll try to get to it all. Try to figure out this girl as much as we can. And we'll read those letters, and we'll look at more things into the life of Cappy that we might never heard of before. And again, when they say Manson don't surf or Charlie don't surf, you can always say Cappy does. And until next time, we get more into Capistrano and the things that they just didn't tell us about these people. Peace.